Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us. I can see the numbers popping up, increasing. Thank you for joining us tonight on this pivotal topic on wildlife, veterinary, conservation. Um, I will quickly start off, so the rest of the people will join us as time comes along. So my name is Diane Mumarungu. I come from Rwanda, where I work with Share Screen Africa as the project lead under Project Conservation Agriculture. So we are live tonight to be joined by participants joining from the Lilongwe University of Agriculture and Natural Resources, as well as students from OOP University. Welcome and thank you for being part of this evening. And please feel free also to drop where you're joining us from in the chat box. And you can add your questions as we get the presentation along. So today we are exploring protecting wildlife, the role of African wildlife veterinarian in wildlife conservation. This is an essential conversation, especially considering the increased threats to biodiversity, such as limited habitats, human-wildlife conflict, and the spread of diseases. Our wildlife veterinarians play a crucial role in assisting with preservation of these species. So before we dive into tonight's topic, I would like to take a moment and introduce someone, a colleague to me, who has been instrumental in initiating this series, Sela Malanga. Please welcome us as you share with us your vision of bringing this conversation to life and your story behind to initiate such a series. Sela, welcome.
Thank you so much, Diane. As Diana said, my name is Sela Malanga. I am from Malawi, the warm heart of Africa. And I am a new veterinary graduate, just a year old in the field. And I work with SHASC in Africa as the Southern Africa coordinator. And today, I'd like to share with you my story, my journey. So, when I joined veterinary school, I had very minimal knowledge on what it means to be a vet. I knew it was something to do with animals, but then in my life, by that time, I've never seen someone treat an animal, but I was just interested because I love animals. So when I was in third year, one day, one of my mentors asked me, Sela, what do you like to specialize on? Then, considering my passion for conservation, I said, I would like to be a wildlife vet. Then from there, I went ahead to visit one of the wildlife vets that we have here in Malawi at a rehabilitation center, Lilongwe Wildlife Trust. Then I told her that I am interested in to becoming a wildlife vet. She asked me, which part of wildlife are you interested in? This puzzled me because I didn't know that it was it was very broad when we say wildlife. I didn't know how broad it was. When I joined Share Screen Africa, I've had a chance to interact with several vets, wildlife vets. That's when I understood that this thing is really broad, because some are just specialized in translocation, where others are working with organizations that deal with conservation, while others they are working at the rehabilitation center, and others they are into research. This is what motivated me to come up with this series of talk, which mainly aims at explaining to the veterinary students, exposing them to vast opportunities that we have in the field of conservation. So I hope you enjoy the talk today. And we have a very young lady who founded an organization called Wildlife Vets. So Diane will talk more about this. But before I hand over to Diane, I would like to urge you to join us tomorrow. We have another talk that might be very interesting to veterinary students who are here. we have a talk titled Avian Influenza as an Important Zoonotic Disease. And we have Robert Bragg as our speaker, who has done a lot when it comes to avian influenza in South Africa. Yeah, he is from University of Free State. And also next week, we'll be continuing with this series where we'll have two veterinarians, wildlife veterinarians, one from Kenya and another one is from Rwanda, and he's into research. So I would like to encourage you to join us again on Tuesday, same time, and yes, same place on Zoom. Yeah, so let me hand over to Jan. Jan, please.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much, Sela, for sharing your story on how you ended up being a vegetarian. And I believe as many as me, we got so inspired to the story behind. And as you had, we have other more series tomorrow and the next day. And the link to tomorrow's session has been shared in the chat box. And as I said, please feel free to share with us where you're joining us from, your country, and you can drop your question that you have in the chat box. We get to you shortly. So now I'm honored to introduce our esteemed guest speaker, Kate Church. Kate Church is the co-founder of Africa Wildlife Vets, and an organization she launched over 7 years ago. Driven by a deep passion for wildlife conservation, Kate has also played a pivotal role in establishing African Wildlife Vet as a crucial support organization for conservation as well as wildlife managers and ecologists. Her commitment to protecting Africa's wildlife and ecosystem is a true inspiration. So thank you so much, Kate, for joining us tonight, and we can't wait to hear from you, your story, and the incredible work you're doing, and the role of wildlife veterinarian in conservation. So without further ado, join me as I give the floor to Kate.
Thank you, Deanne. As Deanne said, I'm Kate Church. I'll start off by saying I'm not a vet. I founded African Wildlife Vets, but I'm not a vet. My degree is, I'm a teacher by trade. I taught foundation phase, or grade ones actually, before moving to the bush and then starting African Wildlife Vets. And this was in 2017. So I started, we started African Wildlife Vets in 2017. I moved to Mkuzi. That's where my mum is based. She is the ecologist for Izimvelo KZN Wildlife. And in long discussions with her, we were I was looking for some way to help. And she said to me, Kate, we really need veterinary support, so why don't you look at something to do with that? And then, so I met Dr. Dave Cooper, who was the head Izimvelo vet at the time, and he's agreed. So we got Dr. Pete Goodman on board as well. He's not a vet, he's an ecological consultant with many years of experience. And so the three of us then founded African Wildlife Vets. And the need just stemmed from increased pressure from outside protected areas, so disease, livestock, increasing populations of community and livestock, and then decreasing budgets within the state. And then last year, so Dr. Rowan Leeming's been with us pretty much since the start, not as a director, but we employed him for a year, and before that contributed to his salary where other nonprofits he was employed by other nonprofits, as Dave was the only vet on the ground at the time. So African Wildlife Vets wasn't just, so our mission is to assist wildlife organizations with the conservation of threatened species by providing high quality veterinary attention and care. So we didn't start just to provide extra vets on the ground, but In addition to that, because of the shortfalls in the state budget, we actually, this is how we started off, was just by buying pharmaceuticals and supplementing what they were already doing. So covering helicopter time or just general veterinary operation costs. And then slowly over the years, obviously that support's increased. And then we've also brought on a full-time vet. And then, so I'll just say that Dr. Ron Leeming then got employed by Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife a year before Dr. Dave Cooper retired. So then for a year, it was just Dr. Leeming on the ground, and we then last year employed Dr. Jen Lawrence, so she's now with us full time. And then in the last 2 years, so our support is primarily based in KZN, supporting Ezemvelo KZN Wildlife. But in the last 2 years, we've started to provide more support in Mpumalanga, mostly to the MTPA, the Mpumalanga Tourism and Parks Agency, and then and then we're supporting private vets in Limpopo, but not so much for private work. It's mostly snaring incidents in government protected areas, and then most of our work actually in Mpumalanga and in the Limpopo is emergency response, and then dehorning operations have increased significantly in the past 2 years. At least for us, I know we've been dehorning for a lot longer than that, but African Wildlife Vets has been supporting a lot, those operations a lot more. So I'm just gonna kind of go through what the operations that we sort of involved with and have supported. Seeing as that we do have an audience, or some people of the audience that are not from South Africa, the conservation space, I think, works quite differently in that we have a lot of fenced protected areas, so animals can't just roam freely as they once did, and so wildlife species are managed to try and emulate what would happen naturally. So this has resulted in then obviously a lot of relocations and like a more intensive wildlife management. So, and then that leads to collaring animals. So collaring actually is it's interestingly a large portion of our African Wildlife Vets funding goes towards collaring operations, mostly of priority larger mammals, so your elephants, lions, cheetah, wild dogs, sometimes hyenas, and placing tracking collars on the animals enables ecologists and managers to monitor individuals. So being able to understand their movements, understanding their population, so whether females are having calves or cubs, or and then also it can alert managers to when an animal leaves the protected areas. And then obviously it's easier to go and find it and bring it back. And then the collars last about 18 months to 2 years, or they should last that long. So this was just Jen collaring a cheetah. And then, so the operations, depending on what species you're working with, every species operation is going to look different. With lions and hyenas, we normally do call-ups at night. So that's when those animals are obviously more active and are going to respond to call-ups, which basically is just setting out a bait and then using a speaker to call using a sound of a buffalo or a wildebeest or a warthog in distress, and then that normally calls in, that you'll use specific sounds for different species, and that normally calls animals in. But it's not always effective. I mean, there are wild animals, and sometimes we've had many nights just sitting out in the dark, waiting, listening to a dying buffalo sound, and literally seeing nothing but a mosquito. It can be very long and it can feel very tedious. So there's, as much as you might see the successes on the socials, there's are a lot of nights where you are sitting and where you are unsuccessful. Relocations. So as I mentioned before, with fence protected areas, animals can't move freely as they once did. So managers and ecologists then have to try and emulate what would naturally happen. So basically that entails taking off individuals, specific individuals, and then bringing in new genes so that you don't get inbreeding. And then other reasons why you might relocate is just establishment of new protected areas or new safe havens for specific species. And the animals there'll always be an agreement between the two reserves, and so yeah, it obviously depends who needs what. Operations for relocations also look different for all the different species. Cheetah, we'll put them in crates, and the same with your lions and wild dogs, especially if you're going long distance via car. There are times also where we've transported via plane, in which case then you obviously keep the animal immobilized the whole time. There have been, I know Dave Cooper has had an incident with a lion waking up on a plane, which definitely is not, you don't want to be in that plane when that happens. And then, so once you've reloaded, especially with the predators, often the reserve that they're coming from will capture them and then put them into a boma, and this just makes it easier to dart them again when they're ready for relocation. And then it also means that you can do it in the early morning and then travel throughout the day so that you're not traveling at night, although there have been many times where the vets have had to drive through the night with animals as well. And then when they get to the other side, generally, especially with predators, they'll be put in a boma for about 4 to 6 weeks just to habituate them to that area. And then capture and retrieval. So basically, that is when animals escape the boundary of a protected area, and it happens quite a lot. And it happens while there are fences, animals dig, animals jump. They don't always keep them in, and we've had to capture all kinds of animals outside reserves, including rhinos, elephants, cheetah, lions, often wild dogs. So it happens quite a lot. And then sometimes they'll use a helicopter to fly them back in or push them back in using the helicopter. And then other times they have to be darted by a vet, like this zebra, and then relocated in via car. This cheetah was found, it was also out of a protected area in some plantations that had actually moved through the Mozambique border, and was in some forest. So Dr. Rowan Leeming had to very skillfully dart it in the forest from the helicopter, and then the quickest way to get it into a reserve where it could obviously be safe was by helicopter. So this one was being airlifted. And then that's an elephant also that was had escaped. There were 5 of them actually that had escaped from Kruger, and then we moved them to another protected area that said that they would provide a home for them. And then rhino dehorning or horn trimming, both words are commonly used. Obviously, with the increase in poaching, rhino poaching numbers have decreased, but in the last couple of years, we have had an enormous number of rhinos poached. 229 rhinos in South Africa in the first 6 months of this year, and 191 of those were killed on state properties. So our vets are, in terms of poaching, especially in KZN, our vets have been involved in a lot of responding to postmortems. So it was a requirement for a veterinarian to perform a postmortem here, and then just to assist with the forensic investigations. And then obviously one method of anti-poaching that is being commonly used is dehorning. So the horns are being trimmed to try and reduce the risk of poaching. It's not a foolproof anti-poaching measure, as we are seeing rhino that have lost horns, that have been dehorned, poached, but it certainly reduces the incentive, as the amount of horn they get is obviously going to be a lot less value, or have a lot less value. So is it an effective anti-poaching measure? It certainly has helped in many protected areas. A lot of reserves have managed to save their rhinos by dehorning, and I guess we'll see, hopefully it continues to be that way. Does it impact the rhino? Not physically when you're actually dehorning. So a horn is made of keratin, which is the same substance as your fingernails. So when you're actually removing the horn, it doesn't hurt. Does it impact the rhino's behavior? I think that there are studies ongoing on this, and I know of one in particular is on black rhino specifically, and they found that the black rhino's range decreased significantly after dehorning, so that it has had an impact there. In white rhino, I think that there are studies being done, and so I suppose we'll see. So obviously another another operation that our vets are constantly responding to is rhinos that have been shot or wounded in poaching incidents, but have survived. So we've seen a lot of rhinos with bullet wounds, fortunately still with their horns. This one was still alive, and obviously had its horn removed. But yeah, this is obviously also an ongoing issue that we're still dealing with. And then, one of the other side effects of rhino poaching is rhino orphans. So in the past year, we've assisted with 12. A lot of these were picked up during the dehorning operation in Mfolozi Park. And probably, finding them was probably as a result of having a lot of helicopters in the air and a lot of aerial surveillance. And then, just picking up these little ones, sometimes next to their mom's carcasses, or sometimes just running through the bush alone. So yeah, so you can see here, so this one was being transported via vehicle, and then that little one was small enough to fit into a helicopter. They've been taken to the Zululand Rhino Orphanage, where they've got an experienced team that have been doing incredible work in caring for them and rehabilitating them. And they continue to do so. So yeah, and then African Wildlife Vets has been, so obviously we're involved in the rescue, but then Ezenvelo used to have rhino orphans, and we've assisted them with buying feed and with covering for security, and yeah, also providing veterinary care when they've needed it. But with the influx of orphans that have happened in the past year, we just haven't had the capacity to care for them. And so that's why we've sent them to the Zululand Rhino Orphanage. Another huge issue facing conservation at the moment is snaring. So a snare is basically just a wire noose that's often tied to a tree and often set on game paths. And so any animal that walks through it is susceptible to being ensnared. And then often, I mean, the snare, we've had snares around the waist, often around the legs and around the neck, especially in the smaller animals. But with elephants, we often find them around the legs or sometimes on their trunks. And so that snares on a rhino. And that wasn't on an elephant calf, so that was around the neck there. Can they recover from snare injuries? Absolutely. We've seen some of the worst snare wounds, and wild animals are incredibly resilient, and they've made recoveries. We've obviously also lost a lot of animals to snares. Hyenas are particularly susceptible, just probably because they follow. So when snare poachers set snares, they'll often set many in a line. So if you've got, and I suppose just, yeah, obviously the more they set, the higher their chances are of catching something. Often the snares are set for game meat, but of course they can catch anything. And so we often see wild dogs and hyenas in snares, and probably because they are following the scent of other dead carcasses. We treat the animals mostly we've had very few snare incidents where there have been one or two, but we've had very few snare incidences where we've actually darted the animals and bomed them for rehab. Mostly we treat in the field, and yeah, as I said, they are incredibly resilient, and once that snare's off, they recover incredibly well. So this leopard was one actually that ended up in a facility while it recovered, because its snare wound was quite severe. The day in a wildlife vet, obviously, as I said, I'm not a vet, but I do work with them, so I have a good idea of what they're up to. It's not always in the field. There's a lot of behind the scenes practice stuff and admin and the not so good looking things. There's also a lot of time sitting in the bush waiting for animals to appear, or as I said, like with the call-ups, you can be out there all night. But then on some days you can wake up, respond to a wild dog in a snare, and then go to a dehorning operation, and in the night do a lion call up because a lion has been seen in the area, and Often, most of the operations are very opportunistic. So yeah, every day I think brings something different. No operation's the same. It's not easy. It's also because our vets don't just work in one reserve. Actually, most wildlife vets don't work in only one protected area. So they're on the road a lot, living out of a bag, and yeah, it's really actually almost the life of you've got to have a little bit of adventure in your soul. But yeah, I think that's pretty much it. You can ask me anything. I won't be able to probably answer any medical questions. But if you have any questions, I can always write them down and ask our vets later. But if you have any questions about African wildlife vets and what we do, you're welcome to ask. I might be able to answer, I might not, and I'll let you know if I can't.
Yes, thank you so much. I love the presentation. I think it pretty much gave us the life of a vet, what happens within the park or in the game reserves, and it was a good experience. I personally, I felt like I'm already there. So they were amazing pictures, and thank you to all the veterinarians on this platform. You're doing amazing work. Like the way we also need care as human beings, also wildlife animal need somebody to take care of their health, and remind that we are also part of people who cause dangers. Like if you took some examples on the snails, like Kate shared with us, that's really dangerous. And so without further ado, let me not take much of the time. Let me welcome the audience to ask some question. However, we had the first question from Eric Mburgo, who asked about if will dehorning leave the rhino vulnerable to predator or food competitors? Or if Eric is comfortable, can you unmute yourself and ask the question live to Kate? Eric Mbula.
Yes.
Yes. Yes, you can ask the question.
I just wanted to know, like, so most of the rhinos depend on the horn to protect itself from the lions, food competitors. So would the horning put the rhino life at risk than leaving it like that? So that maybe we should maybe just confine them rather than dehorning them. According to your study, how far has that helped rather than just keeping the horn like that?
Look, I mean, obviously from the veterinary side, we mostly we perform the operation, and then we provide a service to protected area managers. So I haven't heard of dehorning having an effect on predation and making rhinos more vulnerable to predators. I haven't heard that that's an issue. So I don't think so. Dehorning certainly made a difference to poaching, though, and reduced the number of poaching incidences. So yeah, it has helped in that way. But as to the behavior of the animals, and I don't think it has an effect on the predators.
Yes. Thank you, Eric, for a good question. We also have another question from Rachel Ross. Could you please unmute yourself as well and ask the question? If you don't mind. Yes. Or let me read it.
Yeah, I can. Yeah.
Yeah. So Rachel said, in general, how open is the wildlife industry newly open to graduate vets from outside? She commented that I've gotten the impression that it's quite saturated field just out of interest. Yes. So would you share with him or her how open is the field?
Yeah, it is a difficult space to get into, in particular in South Africa. I can't speak to the rest of Africa, but in South Africa it is while we have a shortage of vets in general, I think the wildlife industry has quite a few, and that's mostly because, as I said, you've got like one vet servicing multiple protected areas. Very difficult to get into, but it's not impossible, especially as a South African vet. If you've graduated from Onderstepoort, my only advice would be is to try and do your CCS. You're close to a place where you're going to get exposed to wildlife. And a lot of the vets I know have got into the space because they've done that. And then you've just try and get as much. It's really probably about who you know, and get as much experience volunteering, and
Thank you, Kate. I hope Rachel, you are answered. So we have another third question from Renette Miski. I don't know if she's okay or him. I'm sorry, I don't know if you're he or she. You have to apologize. I have to excuse myself for that. If you can unmute yourself and ask the question as well.
Sorry, hi. I was just wondering, how can we as veterinary students, can we already become involved in the wildlife industry, or only after we graduate? Like, can we already start working with African wildlife vets, or how does it work? How can you become involved with them?
Yeah, so unfortunately, because we're a non-profit organization providing a service to government, we are, as African Wildlife Vets, the organization, aren't able to accommodate students as much as we'd love to. We pretty much reliant on the organizations that we support. But I know that there have been students that have come. So it's just, getting in contact with people, I suppose, vets in the wildlife space. They are a lot more open to allowing South African vets starting at Onderstepoort to come and assist where they can. I'll have to check with some of the vets and see what what they say, what the right answer to that is. I'm sorry.
Yes, so like Kate mentioned, there's some question that we shall have to get back to you later on. So to move on, let's welcome Erica. Please unmute yourself and ask your question.
Hi. Sorry, I was wondering if there is space for veterinary nurses to work with wildlife in the field, as I know there's lots of spaces where they can work, or there is work available for them in rehab places or places like that, but I don't know of any places in the field.
So I do know wildlife vets that have veterinary nurses. So there is potential. There's definitely potential for that. And I think it's also, it's a space that's growing as well. We don't have any veterinary nurses at the moment, but we've got a team of 3 vets. So at this point, so we don't, African wildlife vets and even Esmvedo at this point don't have capacity to bring on anyone else, but certainly in the space there is, I think it will probably become more common, especially for wildlife vets working possibly like on their own.
Do we have somebody else? Johan, welcome. I see your hand up.
Thanks, Deanne. Kate, also thank you for the presentation. I would like to know, if a rhino is injured, how does it work on your side? Do you get a call from a game reserve? What happens from there? It seems like you must have some veterinarians on standby and that they are delivering an incredible service. Also saw the images of the elephants being translocated. That looks like a really big operation. And yeah, just give us a little bit of a rundown. What happens if you receive this call in the middle of the night? What happens after that?
So different protected areas have their vets that they work with. And I'm certainly not the point of contact. The reserve managers will contact the vets directly to respond. And look, generally we don't get, they won't be called in the middle of the night. It'll be like first thing in the morning, giving them, obviously, the vets time to just quickly pack up and get to wherever they need to be. Because sometimes, for example, if it's a snare in Mkuzi, so all our vets are based in Hluhlu and Poloti Park. But if there's a snaring incident in Mkuzi, they can't drive there. They won't. Well, it's very unlikely that anyone will pick up the snare in the middle of the night anyway. It will be first thing in the morning. So they'll contact the vet, and then yeah, and then they'll get there as soon as they can. Yeah, and then every operation is different, but it depends, yeah, what's happening, whether you need, sometimes you need a helicopter. So if a helicopter is needed, then between the vet and the reserve manager, they'll contact the helicopter service, and then yeah, try and figure out a time when everyone can meet and then make it happen. But yeah, it's not always doesn't always go according to plan. I mean, Jen spent about 11 days trying to call in a wild dog to remove a snare, and without success, morning, night, every day, heading out, trying to call in this dog to try and yeah, remove the snare. And wild dogs are just so clever, they're amazing. And we never got it, but the snare ended up falling off itself, thankfully. So that was, yeah, 11 days of just not much success, but ended up okay anyway. Yeah, but so to answer your question, they phone the vets directly. That's, yeah, and then they plan an operation from there.
Thanks, Kate. Also, just congratulations for, as a very young person, putting this organization on the map and being and operationally managing it. I think it's really something. And did you go through any challenges in terms of that?
It's not easy. And obviously, my challenges are very different to the veterinary challenges. So they're facing their own challenges on the ground every day, emotionally, when it comes to these emergency situations, losing rhino, wild dogs and snares, like can be extremely taxing. And obviously, yeah, even from my side, when you're passionate about it, it's hard to witness a lot of these things. And I'm behind the scenes. So my role in African Wildlife Vets is admin, donor relations, just, yeah, accounts. I do have an accountant that helps me, and I've got someone that also helps me with my social media, but I work very closely with both of them. And yeah, and then, yeah, managing donors. So, and fundraising. That's probably the biggest part of my job is fundraising. And it's not, and of course, and that's what everyone's going to say it, because fundraising is probably the most challenging part. And none of this would happen without, yeah, donations. African Wildlife Vets relies solely on donations to operate. Our full-time vet her salary is funded. So yeah, there's constant challenges with that. And conservations in general, it's not an easy space to work in. but it certainly can be very rewarding, and there is a lot of positive, and it's important to take your successes where you can, because constantly you are one step forward and 5 steps back. And you have to pat yourself on the back for that one step forward, because you know that it's not going to come around that often. So yeah, but it can also be very rewarding and fulfilling. And
Well,
sorry.
Kate, thank you so much for the motivational talk. I think every young conservationist needed to hear that. But also hats off to you. You know, the people behind the scenes make the work possible very often. So congratulations again, and thank you for your contribution tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me.
Yes. Thank you, Johan, for your question. Before I welcome Stella, I have one more question from online, from chat, sorry. From Shane, who said, hi, where would you say is the best place to do CCS? Yeah, if we are interested in wildlife, for example, in which province would they do?
Well, look, it's hard for me to speak in like the provinces in the western part of the country, because we don't do much work there. And so I actually know very few vets from that part of the world. So I'm not sure how. I know obviously that there are wildlife vets in the Eastern Cape, and I don't know how they got into it. On our side here, KZN, Limpopo, and Mpumalanga, the vets that we work with did their CCS posts in Zululand and KZN, Hazy View, I think, is it Hoedspruit? So yeah, any of those, if you situate yourself where there is a lot of wildlife activity, I think your chances are better. And then also you get to know the wildlife vets working there, and just so then you can join them on operations. It makes it obviously easier. But as for the rest of the country, I'm not sure.
Yes, thank you. Stella, you're welcome to ask your question.
Thank you so much, Diane, and thank you so much, Kate, for the amazing presentation. I have enjoyed your presentation so much. Yeah, so my question is quite similar to Johan's question. I wanted to ask, because here we have students, some of them, their goal is to set up an organization in Malawi, just like you did. And yeah, one of my questions was on your admin, like WAKE, what are some of the challenges? And I know you have answered that one on the challenges, because some in Malawi, veterinary is just a new thing, and we don't have many wildlife vets, and I know some of them, they would like to venture in that one.
So obviously fundraising is always going to be your biggest challenge, but then, you know, you've got to, before you start anything, any organization, you've got to go and speak to people on the ground. You've got to find out what the needs are, what's missing, and what gap you can fill. And that's how we started African Wildlife Vets, was me chatting to, well, obviously my mum was a foot in the door as an ecologist and being on the ground. So through her, I had access meeting these people, but then I went to other ecologists and chatted to them and said, do you need this support? And reserve managers as well. And then obviously, I mean, we primarily support the government. But yeah, you've got to chat to people working in the space. You've got to form those connections, and provide something that they need. That's where you have to start. And then from there, there's admin in terms of, I don't know how what the formalities are and how you go about it in Malawi. Here you've got to register an NPO, and you've got to go through the department. So what's it? I don't know why I can't. I don't know why I can't think of the department that you have to go through anyway. And then through SARS, and so there's all that kind of admin, and you've got to submit reports. And DEFI, thank you. Oh no, it's not DEFI. It's I'll think of it. It's for the nonprofits. But yeah, anyway, and then yeah, the work. Look, there's always, if you've got money, there's always places that need help. As long as you're not directing how they use it. That's got to come from on the ground. So yeah, it's really just about finding the need and then fundraising. Yeah,
Thank you
and
so
it's not
much.
always it's not always going to be an actual vet that they need. It might not be a vet that they need. They might have, might have a vet, or might need assistance, or yeah.
All right. So I was saying, I like the way you've put it, that there is need to identify the gap and then, yeah, make connections and start. Thank you so much for that. And my other question is, so I was saying, my other question is, does African wildlife vet also support other vets, other wildlife vets outside South Africa? Maybe it's just within South Africa.
So at this point, I mean, we have the intention to grow. We will start. There's a vet in Malawi. Her name's Dr. Amanda Salb. So we are going to start and have already started supporting her. So that's the first country outside South Africa. And then Dave Cooper, who obviously is one of our founders and head veterinarians, he works across Africa. He assists a lot with relocations and mostly with rhino. But the world is our way. If we can find it, look, it's all funding based. So it depends on, we're hugely reliant on that.
Okay, one more last question. I swear this one is the last one. Okay.
Yeah.
I know you have interacted a lot with your vets. So what are some of the challenges that them as wildlife vets are facing in the field that you can share with students so that they should know that it's not just about roses, there are also some challenges that are faced in this field?
Oh, well, where to start? So just so I've got it right there, they want to know what challenges the wildlife vets face. I suppose not all the work, we'll start with that. Not all the work looks as marvelous as it might on social media. As I said, sometimes it's long hours in the field. It can be tiring, and without successes. Losing animals, which does happen, is also awful. Yeah, I mean, not all of the work is pretty. It's doing postmortems on rhino, dealing with horrific wounds. And then the hours can be super long. It puts you on the road a lot in terms of a lifestyle. That can be challenging if you've got a family or it's not, you away from home a lot. And then what else? I mean, I know Max Krings is here, and he was here. I don't know if he's still on here, but if he is here, he can probably comment because he had worked with us for the whole of last year. So Max, if you're here, are you still here? Okay, maybe not.
No,
Sorry.
No.
So he's left. Yeah, but I think it's challenges are endless. Being in conservation is one big challenge. There's a lot of hardships, and yeah, I think because I'm not a vet myself, they'd have to speak to that themselves.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you, Sela. So, Kate, we have another question from Mike Matale, who said, what are the current research programs that are being implemented to conserve the endangered species? Plus, is it practical to introduce assisted reproductive technologies as a measure to maintain the population of these species?
What? Sorry, I have to read that. What are the current research programs? Okay, there's a lot. There's so much being done. There are many research programs being implemented in conservation across the board on different species, in different protected areas. We specifically are not involved in. We assist researchers, so there are researchers that we will assist through veterinary operations. For example, if they need collars on specific species, if they need rhinos with horn pods, with rhino ear notching, we provide a veterinary service for those projects. As to the actual research themselves, and from an African wildlife ethics perspective, we don't have any specific projects running at the moment, if ever. We completely like operation based. So there are, I mean, the conservation space is actually it's huge. But plus, is it practical to introduce assisted reproductive technologies? I don't know. I'm not sure. I think I'd have to get someone else to answer that question. Yeah, we are at this point, I think, trying to conserve I suppose the individuals and populations that we already have. And so I'm not aware of, I know that there are rhino insemination programs and stuff going on elsewhere, but it's not something that we're involved in. So I actually don't know how to answer that question. Sorry. I'll write it down and table it for later.
It is okay. It's okay. So I want to highlight the comment we got from Lime Best, who tried to answer the question that was asked by Shane about where they could find the work. So he's mentioned, or she, the obvious choice is the Esmilo Posts. Eastern Cape is a good choice if you look for work and you're open to doing it alone without assistance from the senior vets. Also mentioned about Pumulanga has a few posts closed, but many private vets mean you probably won't get the opportunity as a CCS vet. So that was a leaflet from Liam Best. Thank you so much. That was directed to Sean question that he asked. And I want to welcome Johan. I can see your hand is up. Johan?
Thanks, Deanne. I just want to ask the person who asked the question, that would be Mike. Mike, we will save that question and ask it to one of the coming up veterinarians in the series to answer the question live, because the second half of the question is a technical medical question for a veterinarian. So let's please attend in the second episode, and we'll ask the question again. Thank you very much.
I see there's another. What kind of organizations are your donors, and how do you approach the fundraising? I'm not a very good fundraiser. I've always felt that that's probably my biggest weakness in this role. And I feel like I've almost been fortunate in that people have come to us. We good on social medias, and we've used our network a lot. And then I've found in the past that grants, we don't really fit into, there's many grants out there, and I've tried a couple, but because this, because wildlife veterinary is so not structured, it's difficult to give exact amounts, for example, well, for exact value of the operation, or you can't say how every operation is going to go. Sometimes you use more helicopter time and then it ends up being extremely expensive. Sometimes you use less. And I found it really difficult to apply for structured grants, which many of them are. That's not to say that I should probably try harder. But yeah, otherwise a huge portion of our funding comes from foreign nonprofits, particularly in the States and in the UK. That's where majority of our funding is. And then we've got a couple of companies in South Africa, a lot of individuals who just donate small amounts every month. And honestly, it goes such a long way. So yes, hopefully that answers that question.
We still have more people who wants to ask question. Ask Kate if you have a closing remarks that you want to give us.
Not really.
Like a final message to young vets who are here with us.
Sorry?
Yeah. If you can give a closing remarks to young vets who are here with us, who are still in the university.
Well, thank you, Share Screen, for having me, and for I suppose just sharing more about African wildlife vets is always beneficial, and hopefully there's some aspiring wildlife vets that will be able to get into the space in the future.
Yes. Yes, thank you so much. Thank you so much, Kate, for your time, for your knowledge and experience sharing. It was really a learning opportunity and an insightful session tonight. And thank you for everyone for joining us for this session. And remember that we have more series on vegetarian. So please feel free to join. Please feel free to join us. There are a couple of links that we put in the chat box for you to be able to register, and you can be able to join us next time. So without further ado, let me cut it to tell you to have a wonderful evening and see you next time. Thank you so much for joining us.